good to be back with you again. Yes, we're working on a number of deals throughout the state of California right now. For example, we're working on manufacturing deals, retail, construction, healthcare, entertainment, transportation, to name a few. So we're working on those deals from the very top of Northern Cal down to the San Diego area and all parts in between. A great question. My advice on that is you get your attorney involved early on in the deal, and I'll give you some reasons. One, that's the time when the deal is oftentimes getting structured, getting set up, which has great significance for tax purposes and other things. And the longer you go where it may be going down a certain track, and then the attorney gets involved and you need to make some changes, the more difficult it is, the more awkward it becomes. I'll give you a great example. We got pulled into a deal relatively later in the deal recently. They had been discussing a stock purchase for months and months. My first meeting with my potential buyer was going to be much more advantageous to be doing it as a asset purchase from both a liability and a tax standpoint. So we had to go back, meet with the other side, which was the seller in this case, explain why, and in a sense restructure, come up with a whole new agreement, etc., which consumed time, energy, money, etc. And so that would have been very helpful on that deal if we'd been involved earlier on. Plus there are other issues which can come up, such as leases, which are very important, and reviewing those right off the bat to see what the process is, because either an assignment of lease or a new lease by the buyer would become critical, and reviewing those provisions so that it doesn't delay your deal or your closing or potentially kill the deal later on. You'd like to identify those issues very early in the process. That's a very important issue, is having the right attorney can be critical to whether you're going to have a deal successfully close or not. I've seen many instances where you get an attorney on the other side of the transaction you're negotiating with. They are used to battling in court. They go adversarial, hostile very quickly, which is not at all conducive to getting a deal done because it creates friction between the parties. So you want an attorney who they're doing a lot of business transactions and they understand the concept of that it should be a win-win and not a win-lose situation. It's also very helpful if the attorney has great familiarity with accounting issues, such as having an accounting degree, served in an accounting department as CFO, other things, because financials and numbers are critical to the deal. Having that background has been so useful for me for many years because I'm constantly looking at financial documents, financial statements as part of transactions. A few of the things that are helpful tips is go onto an attorney's website, see what are they touting. Are they touting their latest personal injury victory or defense? Or are they talking about that they work in business purchases and sales? Also, you want an attorney who's very responsive to your emails and phone calls. If you have a hard time reaching them when you're even looking at retaining them and they don't get back to you quickly, that's not a good sign. Delay is a deal killer in transactions, and we understand that you have to have a sense of urgency to get deals through, and so responsiveness is critical. And one last issue is it's helpful if the attorneys do not have massive egos. You get those egos involved in deals and it bogs the deals down, and they want to prove that they're right instead of taking care of the client's needs, and it tends to be a major impediment to getting a deal successfully closed. So those are just some ideas, some things to look for if you're selecting an attorney for your transaction, and very critical. Yes, we've represented many buyers and many sellers on different deals. We don't represent them simultaneously on a deal because we are specifically have an attorney-client relationship with our clients, so we can discuss strategy, how to structure the deal, and so that's important. Different than business brokers who can actually serve as dual agents. But as I said, we service probably about half of our deals, both for the buyer or for the seller. Yes, and we do oftentimes financing is critical. And we have contacts with numerous lenders, which we can hook potential buyers up with, and also assist in the process of negotiations, providing necessary information, and then reviewing the financing documents to make sure they're consistent with what our client understands on important things such as guarantees, security, interest rates, etc. So an important part of any transaction, and we work on that quite often. As my earlier example is, there are differences in that, and they're very important. Where you have an asset sale, the selling entity, if it is an entity, will actually still be in existence after the deal, but it is selling certain, usually substantially most of their assets to the buyer. The buyer in turn is usually setting up a new entity to purchase that. And it has very different liability and tax consequences from a stock purchase. And essentially there you are buying an equity. There is an existing company and you are buying the ownership of that company. So all the employees, the assets, everything stays right in that company. It's just that the ownership has changed from the selling shareholder to the purchasing shareholder, but very different structure on how that is accomplished. Yes, we certainly can, and we're involved in some transactions on that right now, because for most businesses, they have real estate involved, be it a lease or owning their own property. And usually if they own their own property, that property is being sold at the same time with the business or the business assets. And so we have handled those types of matters, and it's a whole different area for that because you have a separate escrow with that, financing aspects of that, very important, but we also work on those simultaneously with the business sale. Yes, we work on that. In fact, we're working on a number of fairly complex lease assignments because oftentimes the dollars involved in the lease are actually greater than even on the sale of the business, because you may get a lease that goes out for 10 years and when you look at the total obligation there, it's a lot of money. And so handling those negotiations with the landlord, because if you are representing the seller, you're trying to get it where the seller will no longer have a liability if the lease is being assigned, or in some circumstances it is the buyer entering into a new lease. So very important, and important to be looking at those issues early on, because we've certainly seen deals where that delays the closing of the deal because you are waiting to still get the landlord approval. So we work on those part and parcel as part of the asset sale or the stock sale itself. Yes, there are important various stages that come into a deal. In fact, so important that we are going to be doing a whole new video in our Making a Deal series just to discuss these stages in greater detail. But very briefly, you have the first stage, which is the buyer and seller coming together, getting acquainted, the buyer getting some basic information about the business to determine do they have an interest potentially in buying business. Another important stage is the negotiation and finalization and execution of all the agreements, which could be the asset purchase agreement, the guarantee, note, security agreements, all of those various things. And very important, and that takes some time, but that is critical to the deal. Another significant stage is the due diligence, which sometimes begins before the deal documents are all done. But this is kicking the tires in a sense. The importance of the buyer understanding all about the business that he potentially is going to buy. Another area is the financing, as we've previously discussed, which is critical. And the last area usually is the closing of the deal. That is where you have the transfer of the assets or the stock, if it may be, in exchange for the consideration. If there are notes, cash involved, all that is taking place, as well as employee issues, contract assignment issues. So critical, and that is really the culmination of the deal. Thank you for the good questions, and it's been my pleasure.